Hello children, we've got something interesting to show you here. Now when you talk about car radios you normally think about something about this size that fits in the dashboard, and they're the sort of thing, even something a bit bigger, but of course now a lot of them are integrated in the dashboard and the electronics, but that's the way it is in the dashboard. We're used to that type sort of thing. I had found this little radio here some years ago. I must get it going. It's a Ferris and it's pretty massive, valve set. 6-volt vibrator, quite good. But I'll tell you what, I found in the tip a radio from probably the early 1930s, and this is it here. It's a massive box, so it would have been mounted in the engine compartment, and you drill holes through and you stick these cables, the mechanical cables, and you have this control unit that you mount on the steering column, so you can control the radio as you're driving along. So this is what a radio was like in the mid-1930s, whatever, and it's quite a massive affair. It's got a built-in vibrator supply and probably a 6-valve superhet radio. So it's going to be very interesting to have a look inside this, see what sort of components it uses, how it was constructed, because it's pretty rugged. It looks like a military thing almost, doesn't it, with remote control. And see, yeah, what they did in those days. Now, also, it might be interesting to power it up, see if it actually works. It's been in a tip for 80 years. Who knows how the capacitors and resistors are? They've probably changed value, but it'd be interesting to try it out anyhow, see how it goes. So this is it, a car wireless from the 1930s. You need a big car to put it in. It'd look good in your A model Ford, wouldn't it? I'm sure there's some vintage car people who'd be quite interested in this little device. They can put it in their V8 Pilot and listen to the news. It'd be really good. Now it's pretty well sealed up, except we can see in this part here the power supply. It's got a vibromatic. The rubber mountings have come off, but still it looks pretty rough, doesn't it? And that's divided off from the main RF and audio section in there to get rid of interference from the buzzing vibrator. We'll tack it with a screwdriver. I don't think these screws have been undone for a long time. I had to actually file some of them off to get into it. Okay. Oh look, it's coming out. There's a plug there. So it comes out the radio unit, and the power supply thing stays in the main cabinet. Well, it looks interesting. It's a 6-valve superhet. You've got the RF stage, probably the detector, converter tube, IF stage, audio preamp, and then the a Type 41 as a power pentode, which is quite unusual. I haven't seen one of those before. So interesting what it's like underneath. Well, it's not the nicest looking thing inside. It doesn't look like it's been made by a professional radio factory. In fact, there's no brand name at all on anything. I would say it's been made by a local radio manufacturer or radio shop specialised in car radios back in the 30s. For people who wanted to pay for them, probably had a limited production run. You can see it's a bit messy the way it's built, but it obviously works. Well, it did work in its day. Paper capacitors, old style resistors, some capacitors in there, G-Con electrolytics. I wonder how they still go. So anyway, it's interesting, the 5-valve sockets. It's pretty simple circuit really, considering it's an RF stage and you know, quite a sophisticated receiver. It would probably, if it worked, be very sensitive and quite selective. It's probably quite a good radio. What you'd see in a big radiogram at the time, but compressed into the size of a car radio. So yeah, that's quite interesting indeed. The old style resistors with the dots and colours telling you the values. All the RF valves have got shields on them. The gearing for the tuning capacitor, it's even got backlash gears on it. This set uses the 7-pin series of valves, which is a pre-octal stage. They were made up, well, they were made into the 1950s, but they're basically superseded by the octal valve, which has got 8 pins and a locking thing to make it easy to put on in the socket, and you've got a smaller top cap as well. But they're much the same, and the characteristics of both valves has changed the numbers, and you could they're basically interchangeable electrically. And the pre-octal valves were preceded by these type of things, another 7-pin valve with the big pins, lots of that series, and a 4-pin series are very popular as well. So the history of valves between the late 1920s and early 1930s was massive. There's a lot of development going on. There's a selection of valves that might have been seen in 1930s radios. Okay, here comes the test time. I'm running this not off its vibraphone power supply. It looks a bit messy. I've cheated a little bit. I'm getting the power from another radio here, 6.3 volts and about 250 volts to run this set. I've got a transformer coupled into a loudspeaker. Now the first test I'll do, it's the oscillator valve, which is the oscillator part of these sets is usually the most dicey thing. And I'll just test to see if that works, because if that isn't working, it might be not worth hassling with. So what I'll do, I'll put a Bill Sievers over here, and we'll set that up, turn it on. And if we turn the set on, let's hope it doesn't pop or anything happen. So the power's going into it now, and if this is tuned up about 450 kilohertz from the oscillator up in the 160 meter band. Now we'll turn the condenser and see what happens if we get a, oh, I think there's something there. Let's have a look. Well, the oscillator's working. We're halfway there. Because, yeah, the oscillator and converter stage is about the most complex things in these sets, so that's great. We'll turn it off and we'll set it up now for, see if it actually works as a wireless. I wonder if it'll work. Highly unlikely, but you never know. It's all there. Wow, what do you know? It's working. Well, it's sort of working. The RF side's working, but it's terribly distorted. I think I know what might be the problem. Sounds to me it's coupling into the last valve, the audio output valve. It's obviously leaking DC and stuffing up the bias on the valves and causing all that distortion, so we'll check that out. Okay, we'll see if there's any DC voltage leaking through this capacitors. Oh look, over 100 volts, that'd be stuffing the bias quite a bit. What I've done is put another capacitors in series with the bad one, so any DC should be blocked there, and the bias should be okay, so the distortion might be gone. We'll turn it on, see if it's any better. Switch it on, see what happens.
Overwhelmed, and I kind of slid in my seat thinking,
hey, that sounds fine.
It made me uncomfortable because I thought this poor woman is going to die on stage. But then she started singing, and it was just the most extraordinary voice.
The consequence of the new situation is that Chinese communities already seriously underrepresented in parliaments now find themselves represented by people whose loyalties are in doubt, and the Chinese Communist Party has put...
It's not coming. When will we learn to help each other? Don't know if I can...
She's such a talent. Helen Shanahan.
From Perth.
Three.
Three.
Yeah, okay, so there are group classes, you're doing it with the...
Just for days, wakes up and finds himself in an iron lung and is told he'll never walk again. And there are two ways that you can,
For the first event.
One other two former quarter-finalists many years ago.
Right, so
Gonna leave this old world behind.
Pool that they do not have on land, and so that can be very it can be a very positive experience for people.
Because
that makes me immediately think, because my father was
Can we, the controversy, you're stronger now. Every day, change.
they're from Kiwanja 1-1.
they're really good to deal with.
Tayangda.
Trick again.
Painted black.
And I wish that you would hurt me harder than I hurt you. And I wish you wouldn't wait for me, but you always do. I've been hoping some
Going to get
Grand final.
you know what?